A warm welcome to everyone who's starting to join us this afternoon, European time, in the morning, US time. For those who are from Asia joining us, I guess good evening to you, although I suspect very few of you from Asia Pac joining us in view of the hour. We'll give a few minutes to everyone who has subscribed and therefore will plan to join us today. We're greatly looking forward to sharing our latest analysis with you. So let's just give everyone a few minutes. Of course, this is being recorded, so there will be an opportunity to watch it once more or watch it at your leisure. The purpose of this is certainly to be able to share with you elements of the report that are behind a paywall, so you get, I guess, a deeper, broader understanding of the depth and breadth of our analysis. But of course, more importantly, from our perspective, to be able to field some questions to get your perspective, as well as be able to clarify certain elements of this topic that may be less clear to you. So let's start slowly in view of the time contract we've got with you. Don't want to abuse it. So my name is Julian Salaberry. I'm the CEO and the founder of Galen Growth. I'm joining you today from Europe, where we have our European office, and work very closely with Sarah, who I'll introduce in a few seconds. Galen Growth, for those of you less familiar with us, is now really the preferred digital innovation partner for multinational corporations and investors. We count certainly a great number of blue chip clients as they increasingly focus and engage with the digital health ecosystems across the globe. We provide them with the global coverage of our data and insight set, and we'll come back to that, as well as, of course, our offices across the globe, mainly in the US, Europe, and Asia. Our core solution, which powers everything else that we do, is HealthTech Alpha, which is quite literally the world's leading digital health private market data insights platform, and is subscribed to by industry giants such as Amgen and Roche, and of course in the insurance world, you look at Manulife, etc., all the way through to a raft of investors and promising startups. Why do they use the platform? Because there's certainly more data than anyone else. We have at least twice what PitchBook have on their platform. Best-in-class taxonomy and tagging, claimed to be best-in-class by a third party, not by us. And that enables us to obviously be able to help our clients navigate the space in an unmatched manner, and therefore also produce better search results than even Google will provide. And all of this is powered by the unmatched team of experts at Galen Growth who are absolutely passionate about digital health and the role it's playing in improving patient outcome. The same platform powers the thematic reports that we publish on a monthly basis. For more information, please visit our research page at galengrowth.com/research, where you will find each and every one of the reports we've published since 2017. And of course, this is a reflection of the sort of advisory work or research work we do for our clients. Anyway, to today. Today's focus is on clinical strength in digital health in 2022. It's based on the, I think, 60+ pages of data and insights. There is an exec summary free to download, so feel free to do so if you haven't already, but I'm pretty sure everyone on this call probably has already. The scope of the analysis today is, as always, all digital ventures that have been incorporated since 2002 and are private. And of course sees us very much focusing on their clinical evidence and the clinical evidence they have built. So let me introduce Sarah. Before I do that, feel free to ask questions. Please ask questions. I think someone may have already asked a question, which is fascinating. Oh no, it's Armin saying hello to everyone. Greetings to you too, Armin, and welcome to the webinar. Feel free to use the Q&A to ask your questions. It will enable me and Sarah to be able to answer live as we go through the presentation, as well as be able to answer, of course, in writing as well as we proceed. So let's intro Sarah. So Sarah, you are our very treasured and valued head of research and analytics for Europe and the US. You are the principal architect and author of this report, and so welcome.
Thank you.
Let me give some context before I hand over to you. Obviously, we will conduct this webinar the way we normally do, which is a little more interactive than just plainly going through slides. But as we said a few times already, we really welcome your questions. So just to give some context and a little sneak preview as to some of the analysis we've been doing in the last few weeks. If you look at 2022 year-to-date funding, so that's up until the end of September 2022, we can certainly announce that funding globally overall, and that's just funding, it excludes all exit deals, M&A, SPAC, IPOs, just funding sees a decline of 35% year-to-date versus last year. Of course, last year was a record year and probably an abnormal year, and so we shouldn't be alarmed by the 35%, but we should just recognize the fact that it's down. It's down because investors and corporates are becoming more rigorous in their due diligence. So it's less FOMO, it's more very deliberate, studied approaches to investment. And we've seen the continued trend of funding moving upstream to earlier stage ventures. But we're also seeing digital health venture CXOs focusing increasingly on proof points versus pure narrative as they go forwards to raise funding. Now, before someone who's well versed as to what some digital health points this out, I just wanted to really ensure people understand this report is not a rehash of the JMIR clinical robustness paper, which was published during the summer and really only looked at about 220 ventures in the US. But it is, in fact, an unmatched assessment of the clinical strength of ventures across the globe. So what does that mean? That means Sarah and the Gale and Grove team have looked at over 12,000 digital ventures across the globe to understand the clinical evidence of those ventures. But as we know, not all these ventures are born the same, which means that not every one of them needs to be clinically evident, if it's such a way of describing them. But that's where Health Tech Alpha helps us, because we can really drill beyond the media, beyond the search engine optimization, beyond all the spin, and truly understand what's happening in digital health. So I guess let's start with a little bit of a funding snapshot, Sarah, if I may, just to give people that context, that anchor back in. Can you just really I guess, add a bit more color to what I was saying earlier on a few seconds ago, which is, understanding of the impact of the geopolitical headwinds on digital health funding, but I guess leading us to understand why is clinical evidence even more important now?
Sure. Thanks for the warm introduction, Julian. Happy to be here today. And let's go ahead and jump into to your question there about the funding, because that's a big motivator as to why we're really today looking into clinical evidence for digital health ventures. You already talked about this a lot, and I think everyone is quite familiar with the funding situation. What we see is that, yes, globally, the digital health funding has decreased by 35% year on year. That, of course, depends on the region, global region that you're in, with the US, or excuse me, North America and Asia Pacific being hit the hardest as far as reduction in funding compared to 2002. Europe's also seeing about 7% less funding in 2022, and Middle East is actually up. But funding is coming back. People are getting their feet back on the ground. Different reasons for that, geopolitical reasons, as well as a global recession. But that's kind of one of our motivations for looking into clinical evidence today.
Thank you, Sarah. And that will probably be the last time we talk about funding today, which is hopefully a pleasure to everyone's ears, because there's a lot of funding conversations going on everywhere around the world. So let's dive in. So before we look at the actual outcomes of the analysis, it's probably very helpful for us to understand how we at Get Growth are measuring clinical evidence. What is the methodology that we have designed, and therefore, when we score a venture, what does that look like, and how do we rank the ventures?
That's a very good place to start. So you already mentioned the JMIR article that came out in the early summer, and that kind of was a bit of a motivation. We were able to build on that, looking at evidence for digital health ventures, and that's evidence that those ventures are building solutions that are scientifically proven, scientifically sound, and that they're then building proof that their solutions do in fact benefit the patient. A lot of people say, yeah, there's a digital health hype, is there really any truth behind, these digital health methodologies? And this is the way to put your finger on a number and say, yes, these ventures do in fact have proof that they're scientifically sound and their solutions do work. So we based our analysis on clinical evidence based on three things. First of all, are there clinical trials, any clinical trial that venture has applied for, minus any that they've pulled out of, right, rescinded. So looking at our global 12,000 plus digital health ventures that we have captured in Health Tech Alpha, 7% of those ventures do in fact have applied for, have started or finished clinical trials, right? That number goes to 9% when you look at regulatory filings, and these are filings across the globe. Do not include FDA registrations, because that doesn't show any evidence other than you can fill in a form. And then the final category we have here are peer-reviewed publications. We do consider peer-reviewed publications to be solid evidence that a venture can work according to a scientific process, and they are scientifically sound. They are producing evidence that is agreed by their peers to have this scientific basis to it. And 10% of global ventures do in fact have peer-reviewed publications. So this is what then the three core elements of our clinical strength evaluation are, and kind of the picture globally, how many ventures do fall into these categories and have this type of evidence. Now, the evidence has been growing almost exponentially year on year. You can look, the chart on your left shows since 2012, in fact, the growth of that evidence is quite strong across the board, right? Not only publications, but also more ventures are applying for clinical trials, and they're getting those regulatory filings in. So it's very much a growing area. There's a reason for that. First of all, there are more ventures since 2012. The number of ventures is increasing. Those ventures are maturing, and they are able now, they have the funding available to run the clinical trials in order to have regulatory filings. So there's a huge upward trend here, and that's what we're capturing and then summarizing within this publication. That evidence that we're looking at, it's just distributed globally. We're not focusing only on North American ventures here. What we see is that there are ventures across the globe. 52% are in North America, but there's a quarter of them are in Europe, and then 16% in Asia Pacific, followed by the Middle East. Right. So this is definitely something that we see in ventures across the globe. Now we take the evidence that we've been talking about here, and within Health Tech Alpha, which is our digital health platform, we use those pieces of evidence and create an evidence signal, right? And the signal is then ranks the ventures from 0 to 100 and looks at how strong is the evidence that they have of their solution, right? If the venture has a signal of 0 to 20, that says they have no clinical strength, right? They don't have any evidence to show their solution works. Anything from about 30 to, let's say, 60 shows that they're 30 shows that they're building clinical strength here. So that should be actually 20 to 40 is building clinical strength. That means they don't have any clinical trials, they don't have any regulatory filings, but they do have a few publications. And then after the evidence signal of 40 mark. And I see here that my numbers are a little bit off. Apologies for that. 40 plus, you have established clinical strength. That means either they have one clinical trial, one regulatory filing, or more than 4 publications, right? And then at the top of the pyramid here, ventures that have multiple pieces of evidence or several pieces of evidence, perhaps they have several solutions that all have clinical trials or some sort of regulatory approvals, right? So it's definitely a pyramid. As you go up, there become fewer and fewer ventures, but we consider, again, with anything over 40, that evidence signal of 40 does have established clinical strength. Okay, and there's a note in the right-hand corner that's important. Julian touched on this as well. Not all ventures require clinical evidence, right? Our digital health taxonomy, which I hope I've put in here, you might see later, we consider digital health across many different topics, right? And if you see a venture that's focused on that IT backbone to really implement digital health solutions, right? That those IT solutions aren't going to require clinical evidence. They just don't need it, right? So not all ventures require it. We're going to take a deeper look during this webinar in the exact categories and clusters that do require it, and perhaps those at the lower end that just really don't require it. Does that make sense, Julian?
Thanks, Harriet. It does, and of course, like you, I think everyone's noticed that the graphic glitch has decided that your numbers on the left-hand side are going downhill, but I guess just gravity, I guess. So that's a great anchor point, and it means that hopefully everyone's got a slightly better idea as to how we went about scoring and what does a score actually translate into, and therefore how do we end up ranking these ventures. Before we dive into any specific pieces of this, I'm very keen to understand, we track ventures from incorporation, and we go right the way back to 2002, therefore we have a pretty decent longitudinal data now. So if we look at the relationship between clinical evidence and a venture's age, what does that look like? I mean, is there some sort of correlation there?
There is a correlation. What you see here in this histogram is the age of the venture according to years after incorporation, and then the percentage of ventures in that age category that have established clinical evidence. That means they have an evidence signal greater than 40, right? Which again will be the evidence signal greater than 40 will be our kind of our boundary point for the rest of this report. You see, some ventures do come in when they're 0 years old. They come in already with having established clinical evidence, and those are typically the university spinoffs or another corporate spinoff that they have a technology in place, and then they found a venture with that particular technology already in place, right? And then after that, half of the ventures, 50% of ventures by the age of 4 years after incorporation have established clinical evidence. Going on 80% by the age of 7 years have established that clinical evidence. So looking at this chart, if you're an investor, for example, if you're looking for a partner and you're in an area that does require clinical evidence, you should be able to expect by the age of 7 years old, if a venture is 7 years old, you should be able to expect that they have established clinical evidence. If not, there should be a good reason why they haven't, right? Looking on the flip side of that, and this is kind of telling, there's a heat map here of venture incorporation date, which is going to be similar to age here, and then evidence signal. And what's mostly interesting about this heat map is the bottom left-hand corner. So your left hand, yeah, it's your left hand too. 66% of ventures who were incorporated before 2010 still have not established any clinical strength, right? So those are most likely, not all of them, but most of them are going to be the ventures that don't require it, right? So that gives you a picture of looking at the global world of digital health ventures. 66% of those ventures probably don't, or about 65% don't require clinical evidence. So it's a good earmark to understand what's going on and where to kind of expect or how to expect that clinical evidence to come up when you're looking at ventures.
Cool. So now we've looked at it at a very high level. It's a large blob. We get a rough idea of what it looks like. Let's try and dig into that and try and pull it apart and see what it looks like. And we look at various lenses. Now, I guess somebody looking at this will probably say to you, listen, the US is probably the most sophisticated digital ecosystem out there in terms of how old it is, in terms of the amount of funding it gets, and of course the FDA has been pretty active in defining a set of rules for digital health. And so naturally, of course, if I look at it by regional ecosystems, so North America versus South America versus, say, Asia Pacific, I'm very likely to find the US being in the lead when it comes to clinical evidence. Does that hold?
We can look at that. In fact, US is not in the lead when you look at percent of ventures that have established clinical evidence. Now, there's kind of a battle for the top, but looking at the global map, which you see in front of you, 20% of ventures, so the region with the highest percent of ventures with established clinical strength is in fact the Middle East, mainly looking at Israel. Right, so they're in the lead. The Israeli ventures tend to focus on areas that do require clinical evidence. After that comes Europe, and then in third place is actually the U.S. and North America. U.S., Canada, and Mexico is what we consider North America, right? So yeah, the Middle East and Europe do pull ahead of North America as far as ventures with clinical strength. And what's interesting to see if you look across the average venture maturity, which is Galen Growth has proprietary methodology called an alpha score to rank how mature a venture is. And average maturity is very much higher in North America, but that doesn't necessarily correlate one-to-one with the clinical strength of a venture.
Yeah, and so what does it look like if we dig in and look at country level?
Well, country level, you'll see as far as number of ventures with evidence signal, you'll see what you would expect with the US having the highest number, followed by the UK, mainly because the US just has more ventures. What's more interesting in this chart is looking at the bubbles and the percentages in those bubbles, right? That's the percentage of ventures that have clinical strength. You'll see the US 19% pretty much corresponds with the North American number. The countries that really stand out are the UK, 27%, especially South Korea, and France and Israel. We talked about Israel within the Middle East, context of the Middle East, right? So those are 4 countries that actually have about 20% of their ventures with established clinical strength. So it's kind of a different picture than we usually get, as far as usually North America, US comes out on top, but in fact there are other leaders globally that take the lead with for clinical strength.
Okay, so that's one angle, and it's fascinating to see how some countries are seeing greater traction when it comes to demonstrating clinical evidence. One of the interesting experiences, I guess, for a CXO in a digital venture is the need to build partnerships with corporations, particularly if your business model is a B2B to P, where P is the patient here, but it could be HCP, etc. So if we look at partnerships, and of course we've seen quite a strong momentum in partnership building in 2022, but that's a different topic. What patterns are we seeing if we look at partnerships with digital opportunity corporations and ventures, but through the lens of clinical evidence?
Sure. If we look only at those ventures that have established clinical strength, right? What we see is there are more than 4,720 partnerships, that's been developed between those ventures and external partners. The partners that they're collaborating with, 20% of them are healthcare providers, right? These include hospitals, and probably not too much of a surprise, because oftentimes in order to develop those publications, in order to run clinical trials, they do have to partner with a particular healthcare provider. Following that are the biopharma companies, which do play a very large role in partnerships with digital health ventures, and then academia comes after that. So it's nothing really surprising, groundbreaking there, but it is good to see that the healthcare providers are playing a very integral role in helping to establish this clinical strength and helping ventures to partner together and develop the area further. The geographic distribution is very broad, right? You do see then almost a very, very distributed geographic distribution of partnerships. The Middle East portion there is 4%, although the Middle East is quite is very much has a big strength in the area. Right. Moving over to the clusters. We said we would talk about the clusters, digital clusters, a little bit more. What we see is really that the percentage of ventures with partnerships by cluster, the cluster with the most partnerships is in fact research solutions. So that's those research solutions are going to be drug discovery, omics related research, bioinformatics, right? So there are going to be a lot of the partnerships that are together with the big biopharma companies to bring the health data into the research process, followed by clinical trials and of course health management solutions also is on the top there. So yeah, so you'll start to see, if you look across those clusters, a pattern as to those are the strongest clusters, in fact, that do have ventures with established clinical strength. Now, if we keep on this and look at actually the most active partners with established clinical strength ventures, Novartis comes out on top, right? The big biopharma companies with a most recent partnership with Bioformes, and then government, the NHS is incredibly active in partnering with digital health ventures, right? And after that, then come more biopharma companies. So there's a lot of partnerships going on. 48 is a little bit more than a third of Novartis partnerships are actually with ventures that have clinical strength, established clinical strength.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Novartis. I guess it's worth plugging the fact that last year we published what we're calling the Pharmaceutical Digital Innovation Index 2021. Of course, I know you're currently working on the 2022 version, and it's been quite a substantial amount of activity from a pharma goes, which means that we're starting to see some really interesting trends between the 2 years, or certainly over the last 12 months. So stay tuned for the, I guess, the Galen Growth Pharmaceutical Digital Innovation Index 2022 report, which is looking at, of course, the quality of the portfolio of digital ventures they have partnered with, as well as their fit for purpose, or their fit for the strategy of the business. And that's coming out later on this year. Let me just tap on Howard's question, Sarah. Howard is a good friend of Galen Growth, and he's looking through the lens of North America, more specifically probably Canada as well. He refers to your point at the beginning that, of course, not all digital health ventures need to demonstrate clinical evidence. He's asking really, how do we delineate ventures as needing versus not needing?
We don't draw a line at Galen Growth as to who needs it and who doesn't. That's very hard. It definitely depends on the exact solution, right? When you look at things like online marketplace, right, which you say, okay, well, this is where they go shopping. That's not, you can't just draw a line, because they do have some on-demand lab testing and stuff like that. So the devil's in the detail there. At Galen Growth, we cannot really delineate and just say these categories don't and these don't, these do. It really depends on the solution. Whereas there are definitely areas that I would say probably don't require any sort of evidence of efficacy, right? Again, if we go into simply, well, not simply telehealth or teleconsultation is definitely one where it's in the gray zone, but other areas, online communities and stuff like that, you can say they don't require it. But if you do have a publication, it's great to say that this community is really increasing the overall health of the members. So it's hard to draw a specific line. We're going to jump into now, really looking at those clusters, and then you can see by the trends as to where you're more likely to or less likely to.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest as well. Because there's two things really we're really good at Galen Growth. One is our taxonomy. How do we map the digital health ecosystem by its capabilities, its value proposition to the healthcare environment? and that's been, common feedback from many people we work with. And the other, of course, the way in which we look at therapeutic areas, or more specifically sub-therapeutic areas, where, of course, the TA, the core oncology, will need to be broken down into its different types of cancers. So with that in mind, and drilling into that level of detail, let's start as well, of course, with the way in which we look at digital health categories, or clusters and categories, where clusters are, I guess, categories regrouped with commonality. What are we seeing by way of clinical evidence proof points if we look at it through the category lens? And of course, what does that also look like if we then look at it through the therapeutic area lens?
Right, and that's where we're headed, I think, with that question. As you mentioned, in the full report, you see in the growth taxonomy of all digital health clusters. Each cluster is broken down into categories, right? And so, looking at on the cluster view, what we see is the top 3 clusters, right, for ventures with established clinical strength are medical diagnostics, right, including medical imaging, omics-related diagnosis, and a few others. Remote devices, which isn't surprising. Most devices do require an approval, a regulatory approval, if they're going to be used for healthcare purposes. And then patient solution. And patient solutions does include disease management and includes digital therapeutics, as well as medication management and patient self-diagnosis, right? Third place is clinical trials. That starts moving into less than 20% of ventures. So really, medical diagnostics, remote devices, and those are the 2 names that you see coming up across most of the regions, across North America, Middle East, and Asia Pacific. Europe then, instead of remote devices, has the patient solutions cluster, moving it up into the top 2 as far as clusters with the highest percent of ventures with established clinical strength, right? And that has a lot to do with the DIGA in Germany, because those ventures do have more digital therapeutics ventures have more of an incentive to push their solutions into the market. Right. If we move on to therapeutic areas, don't let me move on. If a venture has a focus on a specific therapeutic area, then we see the numbers really going up. Respiratory disease, cardiovascular, gastroenterology, infectious diseases, as well as oncology. Right. They're all across the line have a very high percentage of ventures with proven clinical strength or established clinical strength. So you really start to get a very higher percentage of ventures compared to ventures that are more disease agnostic, right? You have that comparison. Now, what is a bit questioning, and I was recently at the Frontiers Health Conference and asked someone who's in a digital therapeutics for mental health, is why in the heck mental health is the largest therapeutic area that ventures focus on, right? In Health Tech Alpha, if you look at the ventures by therapeutic area, mental health is in fact has the largest number of ventures, but it only has 16% of ventures that have established clinical strength. So it's a bit shocking to see such a low number within mental health. I was the person I was talking to in Wise Therapeutics was saying the bar is in mental health quite high for really publishing and getting evidence for clinical strength, which is an interesting explanation. But oncology, which is number 2, has 37%, and preventive health, which may be a little bit more explainable because you don't necessarily have to have that proof, right, of efficacy in order to get a preventive health app, for example, on the market, right? There's a different, you're going more into the wellness cluster when you get to preventive health. So that's really the picture. If you look across therapeutic areas and look at then those top 3 therapeutic areas as far as venture volume. It's very telling, and it's interesting to see the numbers. The report has a few more details once you go into those therapeutic areas and digital health clusters as to how those ventures are distributed. Does that make sense, Julian?
It does. Hopefully, it makes sense to everyone with us today. No further questions at the moment, Sarah. So let me ask you a bit more of a crystal ball one, which I know is not the purpose of this report because it really wants to focus on facts rather than speculation. But based on your conversations and the way you're looking at the space evolving, how are you expecting clinical evidence to evolve in 2023 and beyond?
It's a good question. What we saw with that chart of being as to the amount of clinical evidence being established by digital health ventures, right, with almost exponential growth, we definitely expect that trend to continue, right? More ventures will continue to generate evidence to prove that their solutions work because the market is demanding it, right? It's no longer that everyone can try something out, put a creative app onto the market and expect it to work, right? Those partners are expecting proof of efficacy. Of course, regulators are expecting proof of efficacy, and the payers, right? They're no longer saying, "Hey, let's try this out and see if it works." They're saying, "Bring us something that works, and we'll go with that solution." So it's a trend that is becoming very critical in the market. We expect to see more ventures developing that clinical strength. And really, we see, especially with the funding crunch going on, we expect to see the more mature ventures actually partnering or acquiring less mature ventures because of the acquisition, because that less mature venture cannot find funding. We expect to see more in M&A in order to help bring solutions onto the market, and the more mature ventures can definitely help those less mature actually develop and generate evidence that's required. So it's a trend we definitely expect to continue, and we see it driving a lot of decisions in the future.
Yeah, and I guess in that vein, we will obviously continue to monitor simply because it is data within HealthTech Alpha. It's data that you can look at a venture level, as well as you could use to filter and screen when you're doing your analysis within HealthTech Alpha, the platform. But we'll also see ourselves publishing our findings for 2023 yet again to demonstrate how the overall evidence is improving, hopefully year on year. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks very much. Slowly running out of time, but just to remind people, this is only a snapshot of the full report. And so visit our research page to access the full report. It's a report that's free of charge to our HealthTech Alpha paid subscribers. We publish one of these each and every month, so hopefully you've seen some of these yourselves before and have downloaded some of these before. Going forwards, we're certainly looking at a few more reports. As I mentioned, the Pharmaceutical Digital Innovation Index is due for a refresh before the end of the year. We will be publishing some other analysis at HLTH, the large digital health conference in Las Vegas next month. If anyone's going, please shout. It'd be great to meet you in person at HLTH, because I will be there with Lawrence, our GM for North America. In fact, we've got a couple of speaking slots as well, so we're greatly looking forward to networking and meeting as many people as we possibly can in that period of time. For those of you who've not yet had the opportunity to experience HealthTech Alpha, you can create your own free of charge account. Just go to www.healthtechalpha.com, the third URL on the page in front of you. Create your own account and navigate away. Otherwise, any other questions, please feel free to visit us at galengrowth.com and drop us a line, or via LinkedIn for that matter as well. But as there are no further questions, Sarah, thank you very much for your time and sharing with us some of the salient points from your extensive analysis in this space. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. And we look forward to seeing you soon for our next webinar. Have a great rest of your day.